What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, live today on July the 15th, a Monday to start the week. We have training camp starting this week with some teams. We have the Houston Texans starting on Wednesday, and I believe the Chicago Bears on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. Two of the earlier teams to have their full rosters in at training camp, but curiously, the Baltimore Ravens have their rookies already starting and reporting to training camp this past Saturday. So we're getting more into the full swing of things as we get deeper into July. But on today's episode, we're going to talk a lot about the New York Jets, Aaron Rodgers giving an update on his Achilles injury, talking about his Egypt trip and all that. Then some more on the New York Jets, talking about the rumors about Davante Adams potentially joining them sooner rather than later. Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson gave their comments on that idea, and also the Steelers' Cam Heyward hates the idea of the team being on Hard Knocks this season. Hard to disagree with him, being a fan of the team, but we're going to get into what he said as well, plus some more topics on today's show. And before I do start, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. Using that link, I'm able to see your question or comment in the chat box. I'll read it on air and get your guys' thoughts on anything I say or on any of the topics. It's a massive help for the show and the network. So if you guys would, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net, with any question or comment that you may have. In saying that, though, we're going to start off right off the bat with Aaron Rodgers. He spoke at this past weekend's golf tournament, the American Century Championship, where he was there participating with some other athletes, playing a little bit of golf, getting some media attention as well. And of course, they're going to ask him about the plethora of things that happened with him this offseason, starting off with his Achilles injury after a nightmare season last year for the Jets, and especially for Aaron Rodgers, for being now a 40-year-old quarterback. A very scary injury to tear your Achilles last year, so early on as well. And everybody knows how the season went for the Jets, a whitewash right after that. But now Aaron Rodgers is fully recovered. He took part in all the voluntary workouts this offseason, and after that, he did miss mandatory minicamp, but he did look good, according to reports from the voluntary workouts this offseason. So this is the first time the media has really gotten a chance to speak to him since OTAs, I guess, since he missed mandatory minicamps, and he spoke about where he is with his Achilles injury, and he said, "My Achilles feels good. I feel really good at the end of last year. Then, there's always that kind of plateau part. It's just about getting back into it. I feel good." And that's pretty much all that he mentioned about his Achilles injury. You've seen enough through the clips and some of the pictures and things like that from voluntary workouts. He was pretty much getting back into the swing of things last year, but the Jets really didn't have much to play for at that point of the year. But Rodgers, regardless of that, kept going on his rehab, and now headed into this offseason, really started off right from the beginning. And ideally, you would have liked to have seen him there throughout the entire process, but then we had that weird situation pop up with mandatory minicamp. Everybody expects Rodgers to be there, the starting quarterback, with how they handled the season last year and how he got injured. They never really built up any chemistry in at least any of the games that mattered, so of course, why wouldn't he be there? But he missed that first day. Alarm bells rang. But after that, everybody assumed that he would be there the rest of the day. But it turned out that Rodgers was actually going to miss the entire period because of what was later revealed to be a pre-planned trip to Egypt as sort of this last, reward for rehabbing so hard, getting back from that scary Achilles injury for Aaron Rodgers. And it was pre-planned already. They announced mandatory minicamps later in the year. I don't know when Rodgers planned the Egypt trip, but, regardless, it was a clash of just the schedules getting mixed up, and the Jets understood where Rodgers was at and where he was coming from with the Egypt trip. They wanted to reward him. They didn't want to take their reward away from him. And basically the main idea coming from the Jets and this entire situation was that because he was there throughout the voluntary parts, he didn't have to be there. You see many star players not show up to OTAs and the workouts and things like that. The general census coming from the Jets was that because he was there when he didn't have to be, it was all right. There was no problem really from within seeing Aaron Rodgers miss mandatory minicamp, especially because it almost just seems like a continuation from OTAs, just a little bit more intense, you could say. It's still football without pads, so I don't know how much more detailed you can get. It's really just about the principle, really, with Aaron Rodgers that ticked a lot of people off. Rodgers obviously rubs people the wrong way, a lot of people the wrong way with what he says, and now the fact that he wasn't showing up for a mandatory part almost sent the wrong message. I interpreted it as that a little bit, but if the Jets don't have a problem with it and it's not going to be carried on over into training camp and things like that, I think everybody could wash over it. But he did talk about it a little bit in some of his statements when he brought it up. He mentioned that, as you can see there on the screen, he mentioned that on the Egypt trip that he had a beautiful trip to Egypt. This is like the last marker. Summer's over on Sunday, meaning yesterday. Walking up on 18, the 18th hole of American Century Championship, is super bittersweet, but it's fun to be out. And that's just going off of what I said. Getting his last rounds of golf in there, getting the last, licks of summer in there. I'd imagine when he said that yesterday, that now this week is going to be sort of a ramp-up week for him right before training camp, because you're not going to hop into pads right away, but also it's going to be a little bit more intense, a little bit more game-like, if you will. And this week, I'm sure, like most players will, Rodgers will use it as a ramp-up week to make sure that Achilles is right. And that's super important, obviously, for Aaron Rodgers at his age, at a period in his career where it's more so about, the accolades. What have you accomplished? Because everybody knows that he's good. Everybody knows that he's a good quarterback. But also, it's almost like Dak in a way where the regular season is great. You win these MVPs. You get all these stats. And you play very good. But it does come to a point where you are so good, especially Rodgers, where he is later in his career than Dak. You're getting compared to some of these other quarterbacks in history based on arm talent, but they obviously have more accolades, more championships, more awards, or anything like that than Aaron Rodgers in his one singular Super Bowl. So there is a lot more pressure, not only on Aaron Rodgers, but on the Jets as well, because they put so much into this season, going out and getting Rodgers, going out and getting Mike Williams, bringing in the offensive line help. And you have a very good defense, very young, exciting defense, so you made sure to get all the pieces in line on offense to make sure this season, obviously last year was supposed to be this year, but you couldn't control that freak injury, so now it ramps it up even more. And this training camp is going to be super important because I still have a lot of doubts around this team, around not so much Aaron Rodgers. This was brought up to me earlier today in our production meeting about, if Rodgers plays like he did his last year or two in Green Bay, do the Jets have a chance of making the playoffs or making the Super Bowl? And it just goes off of what I was saying. I'm not too worried about Rodgers. If that freak injury, like another Achilles tear, happens, that's just the risk you run with playing at that age, especially coming off of that injury. But if that doesn't happen, I have no concerns with Rodgers or playing at his age or have any worries about if his arm's still there. He's not my main focus. Just going off of my last point, it's the rest of the cast around him, because they're not bad players, but it's just the injury scares, the inconsistency and stuff like that that almost has been like a dark cloud over this team, and almost like the Cowboys, where what can go wrong will go wrong. You hear that endlessly, but it seems to have started to infiltrate the Jets a little bit, and that's really what worries me with the offensive line chemistry, their health at the end of the day. Mike Williams, how's he going to look? And just all that bundled up together. They don't have an overly tough schedule, which is good, but they have a lot of primetime games and a lot of weird scheduling at the start that could become a bit of an issue. But ultimately, Rodgers says he's feeling good. The Achilles is looking good. He had that Egypt trip planned, and now he could really focus in on football, which at the end of the day is the biggest thing. And it all seems to have finally washed away. There's no problem within the Jets, so that's always a positive thing. And once we get now into training camp, like I mentioned, teams are starting this week, and also the rest of them are starting next week. I think the latest date that some teams report is July 24th, and that's the Steelers and the Cowboys and one other team. So the offseason's starting to ramp up now, and one of the things I'm interested to see here with the Jets as I wrap this segment up is just how this offense sort of looks with Rodgers being thrown back into it, because last year that was a major problem, or just a big talking point with it, that this offense should not have looked so bad with just Aaron Rodgers missing. Obviously, he's probably 70%, 60% of it, but you still had Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, and some of these other playmakers on the New York Jets team. It should not have looked like a bottom 5, bottom 3 offense just with a changing of quarterback. They really struggled to put points up on the board, and I know Zach Wilson isn't Aaron Rodgers by any means, but they could have looked a little bit better. And Nathaniel Hackett still being there, that was another thing that was questionable by the New York Jets to keep him around. Some people say just because of his relationship with Aaron Rodgers, but albeit that being true, maybe not. I'm interested to see now if Nathaniel Hackett has grown from that, has thrown in some more things to make it more of the scheme rather than Aaron Rodgers calling out the plays that he wants, all audibling to the plays that he sees best. If I see some growth there from Nathaniel Hackett over training camp into the regular season, I think it'll give him a better chance if other things could potentially falter throughout the course of the regular season. But that is where we're at. That's where the Jets are at. That's where their leader, their golden quarterback is at right now in the offseason, ramping it all up before the start of training camp this week. But on that topic, and on the topic of just getting geared up for this season, a big portion of this season is going to be around Hard Knocks, the in-season version. And coming up after the break, we're going to talk about that specifically, the in-season version of Hard Knocks, and how Cam Heyward is not a fan of the Steelers being on there. It's not technically the Steelers, it's the entire AFC North, but regardless of that, Cam Heyward is not a fan of having cameras all up in his face and all up in the Steelers locker room. I'll tell you guys what he said on that topic and why he's not a big fan of it after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Jumping right back into the action on today's show, the in-season version of Hard Knocks is going to be exciting as a fan of television entertainment. The NFL and HBO announced that the AFC North was chosen as the Division II feature on the in-season version of Hard Knocks this year. The first time ever they're focusing in on an entire division rather than just one team. And if you guys have been watching Hard Knocks, keeping up with it, the offseason version, the one that we're in right now, is following the New York Giants. And then once we're into training camp, it's going to switch over to the Chicago Bears. But back on the in-season version, AFC North, chosen as the one to feature on the show. And good and bad comes with it. You know, the good as an entertainment standpoint, from an entertainment standpoint, I think it'll be a lot better having a lot of different perspectives and just a lot of different environments surrounding football, and how they're also closely related, with the Ravens maybe following the Steelers and how well they're doing. How does a Bengals win or a Bengals loss affect the Browns in any way? That aspect of it I think is really intriguing, and also just, like I mentioned, getting the perspective of John Harbaugh and Derrick Henry and Lamar and Deshaun Watson trying to make, you know, a name for himself again with the Cleveland Browns, Joe Burrow coming back from his injury, the Steelers managing their quarterback situation. It's all going to be very awesome to just watch and keep track of from a fan perspective, but from a player perspective, the longtime Steelers veteran captain Cam Heyward addressed how he felt about it on his podcast originally, and he said that flat out, he said, "I hated it. I don't want to be on this." And he also said that the clips from Hard Knocks could be taken out of context, and it's just almost inevitable that once you have cameras in your face that you're not going to at least act a little bit differently. From his perspective, that's really what he fears. He doesn't like the fact that some guys are just going to act differently and they're not going to be themselves just because the camera's in their face, acting as that distraction that makes everyone a little bit more uptight, makes everyone a little bit more uncomfortable while maybe they're in meetings interacting with each other, and then it just gets weird if you know a guy's not acting the right way or just not acting like himself. So I can understand that, but Cam Heyward actually went more in depth on that specific topic in a statement that he made recently. I'll bring it up for you guys here. He said it a pretty long-winded explanation, as you couldn't see there. He said, "The locker room is the locker room, and I just don't want that getting messed up. There's so many inside jokes, so many people. There's so many people, like, you would assume everybody's a jerk if you heard everything, but it comes from a loving place, and it comes from a caring place. We all want to be better, and we joke a lot. We poke and prod at each other, but it doesn't always come off that way, and so that's the only thing I really worry about." And again, it's a fair point, just a longer explanation on more cameras being in and around the locker room, especially in some tight situations, because you don't know how the season's going to play out. No one knows how good they're going to be. If a team's good and the cameras are all in your face, I feel like that'll loosen you up a little bit more because you don't have that weird pressure of acting a certain way or acting like... It's kind of weird in a situation because, say, the Browns or any team in this division are losing or in a bad situation or on a losing streak or something like that. If a camera's in your face, you almost want to act like it almost bothers you more in a way than it does show truly, if that makes sense. You almost want to show off to the camera that you're really locked in or you're really upset that the team's in a losing situation, and that part becomes weird with your teammates if they know you don't usually act that way. You're almost just putting on a show for the camera to make yourself look better rather than just being yourself. So those are the moments that I assume Cam Heyward is referring to. And also, if you're winning and if everything is going great for you, then maybe you don't act out so differently, sort of to play devil's advocate a little bit there. If Cam doesn't like it, just win and then it won't be a problem. I'm sure some people will say. So the risk really runs a little bit higher when you're losing and guys are upset that they're losing. They're annoyed of the fact that they're not playing well. And now you find out that this week it's your turn to have Hard Knocks in and around the locker room, in your business and stuff like that. A shorter leash for a lot of distractions, a lot of things with the cameras and things like that when it comes to things like this. So that's where it could become a little bit of a problem. Probably makes for great television if you have a guy lashing out or something like that. But from a player's perspective and as a Steelers fan, I when I first heard the news, I was really hoping it wouldn't be the AFC North. I knew people wanted to see the AFC North. I knew people wanted just to see all the behind-the-scenes things, the behind-the-scenes stuff of this division. The Ravens were great last year. The Bengals were 9-8, I believe, and they didn't have Joe Burrow, so how is he going to look when he comes back? The Browns were good. They were in the playoffs. The Steelers were in the playoffs as well. So I was hoping it wasn't going to be them, but I knew they had a good shot of it. And like I've said, as a Steelers fan, I really didn't want this to be the case just because I am in the same boat as Cam. I don't like the idea of just more eyeballs on the Steelers. I've always been a pessimist about it. When the Steelers are more of an underdog, I feel more comfortable because of the expectations on it. So now with people looking at it more, I can see where it could just become a bigger distraction if a personal interaction is caught on camera or something like that, and now it becomes a bigger story. You never know how the season will pan out, what sort of reactions, relationships, and things you're going to get from that nature. So that's my worry, similar to Cam Heyward, but it's weird with Hard Knocks because not a lot of benefits come from it when you're the team that's on it. It's a benefit for the NFL for growing the sport, for growing it elsewhere, for people that aren't such big football fans, if they get a taste of the behind the scenes, maybe they'll get locked in and start following that team because it's interesting. But from a team, you don't really get too much from it. Maybe you get some extra fans, I guess, but you don't get any benefits from really the cameras being in your business and in the locker room, especially if you haven't done it before. I don't think the Steelers have ever done it before, so this will be something brand new for them in a season where there's a lot of change already going on with them. Like I've said, new quarterbacks. Mike Tomlin was extended, but that's, I'm sure, going to be a topic of conversation on Hard Knocks. Cam Heyward, what's his contract situation like? Nobody likes airing that out in front of the cameras or to the public, so that's another thing that could get a little awkward. Najee Harris also, not the biggest fan of talking to the media from his actions recently. He's also on a contract year, so a lot of things could get a little weird, a little touchy with the Steelers especially. So I'm not looking forward to that if things boil over, but you can't do anything about it now. This series will debut on Tuesday, December the 3rd, which is between Week 12 and Week 13 of the NFL season. And with all the good points that Cam Heyward made, and I am an advocate for them, and I am on his side, one of the benefits of it be a whole division is the fact that you're not every week getting the cameras in on different days or on the same days every week. That's the only positive I see from it. You know, if it was following just the Steelers or just the Ravens the entire season, that would be a problem, or at least the first half of the season, however they do it. That would be more of a problem, because then it would be every week that you have these cameras in your face. And I don't know how they're going to distribute it, how they're going to set up each episode, but I assume it's going to be less in quantity each week with the cameras, because they have to get the shots and episodes recorded around other teams rather than just yourself. So that's a little bit more of the pressure alleviated off of each of these teams. So that's a little bit better. But again, it's just a weird thing to have if you haven't been on it before, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's also, just based off the fact that this season is pretty big for a lot of these teams to have it focus in on this division. The Steelers just coming in, trying to get some more playoff success after what they've had recently in recent years. I think it's been almost 10 years since their last playoff win, so they have a lot of pressure with that and trying to resolve that. The Ravens, how do they respond after a very great year? They got, I would say, a little bit better, but they did lose some pieces as well this offseason, so how are they going to rebound? Bring in Derrick Henry, that's a huge storyline to follow. How does that all play into each other? Then with the Browns, very, very good defense, awesome defense. Then on the offensive side of the ball, Amari Cooper's holding out. How's that going to play out, if he's going to re-sign before training camp, or maybe throughout the season it gets a little bit icy between the two parties if nothing's been worked out. If you don't want that airing out, you'd probably have to have that resolved, but that's another situation where it could get a little weird if Amari Cooper's not there or he's not fully there, if the contract negotiations take a long time. Same thing with Deshaun Watson. Frustration could boil over if he's not having the start of the season that he envisioned. And with the Bengals, similarly, more of a positive with them. They get their starting quarterback back, but on the defensive side of the ball, I feel like they've been stronger in the past than they are coming into 2024 with a very, I would say, just inexperienced unit, especially in that secondary where they're trying out different things right now. They're trying out a safety at corner and trying to get that transition to smooth out before the start of the regular season, because it's looking a little bit low in depth at those spots. So with this all being all zoned in around Hard Knocks, all being, I'm sure, different aspects of what we're going to see on the show, it should be great television. It should be great for the NFL, especially with this division, probably the best and most competitive one in football. I was hoping it might have been maybe the NFC West or something like that to follow the 49ers. With the Bears being selected for the training camp version, I knew it wasn't going to be them. And then after that, there wasn't too many to pick from. Maybe the AFC South, but regardless of that, there wasn't too many to pick from. So the AFC North was always going to be the favorite. It's going to happen now. A lot of people, I think, are going to be big fans of it. I've been a big fan of the Giants one, only 2 episodes in, and it's already been very good. So hopefully it's not as dramatic for the Steelers when it does debut again on December 3rd, which is a Tuesday. You guys are probably all going to go check it out. I recommend you guys do. It should be good, but I'm a little bit pessimistic about it. Let me know what you guys think. Was it a good choice to select the AFC North, or would you have rather seen another division be featured on Hard Knocks? But with that being the case and being the ultimate decision up until now, we're going to move on to the next break of the show. And when we return back on the New York Jets, talking about the possibility of Davante Adams reuniting with Aaron Rodgers there in New York. Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson give their opinions on it and how excited they are to have Davante Adams on the team. I'll give my thoughts and ask you guys if that's really necessary for Davante to join the New York Jets. That question and that topic are coming up after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, back on the New York Jets to talk about them getting better in 2024. How do they do that? Obviously, it wouldn't hurt to have Davante Adams back with Aaron Rodgers, and that has been a rumor that has gained a little bit more traction, I think, over the last few days, over the weekend, really, because this started to swirl up at the beginning of the offseason, where a lot of rumors were just flying all over the place during the tampering period and all of that, the start of free agency, and especially around the draft as well, you get more of your rumors. But now, this is a new one that I've seen pop up yet again, and initially, I wasn't a big believer in this ever happening. I just thought it was over. You know, the Raiders gave a massive contract to Davante Adams. The New York Jets are sort of doing their thing, building around Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Mike Williams, obviously Aaron Rodgers. That seems to be their identity, their core group of guys there to build around. But at the end of the day, you can't really ever be perfectly content with what you have in your roster. There's always improving. There's always room to get better, and I guess that's where this is coming from. You know, I first heard about some rumblings about this on the Up and Adams show, and how Davante Adams was on there, and he talked about Aaron Rodgers recently just being in his ear about playing together again. Then, after those comments, you had Aaron Rodgers say at a golf tournament that he loves Davante as a teammate previously playing with him, and that he can't wait to play with him yet again. So it doesn't get much clearer than that. Obviously, he said he can't wait to play with him again at some point. It's going to be soon, because Aaron's not going to play for the next 5 years if it were to be the case. Same thing with Davante Adams. So I guess he could play for the next 5 because he's only 31. But we have a small window here where if it is going to happen, it's going to happen pretty soon. So that added some more gas on the fire there. Now you have Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall pretty much being very open about it, being very just nonchalant, very casual about talking about Davante Adams, almost like he's on the team already. Specifically Breece Hall, he first had some comments to Kay Adams on the idea of this happening, and he said, nah, I'm getting the ball the second most, referring to Davante Adams. Davante, he knows he's going to get his, and pretty much seeming like Davante's already on the team, talking about who's going to get the ball the most amount of times on the team. So that was one thing. Then Breece Hall continued, and he said that, hey, you never know about the idea of Davante joining the Jets. He said, you never know. We're always talking. We're always scheming about the possibility of Davante joining. So that's Breece Hall, pretty clear about it. Then Garrett Wilson shared some similar feelings about the whole situation to the New York Post. He said, I see that. I'm excited. I'm with all of it. Anyone we can get into the facility to help this team win games, I'm with it, and he's one of those. A little bit more eased off, not too eager about it like Breece Hall was, but he kept it more politically correct. Not specifically mentioning Davante Adams like Breece Hall did, but you get a similar idea, sort of sense from both of them that, hey, this could be a reality in the near future if they're going to keep talking about it, if they're getting questions asked about it right now. But more from Breece Hall about this idea of Davante Adams going to the New York Jets, joining him and the team, and how deadly of a team they could be. He said, I think we should. I'm on board. I mean, with him, with Garrett, and Mike Williams. Just pick your poison. Do you want me to beat you, or do you want those two beating you with Aaron? And those are pretty much all the quotes. Both of them young guys, obviously. Both young, hungry guys that want to have success on this team. And usually with the younger players, this new generation of players coming in, they're not really too shy about saying things or saying how they feel. So I guess I shouldn't be so surprised, but I don't know. You don't really hear it be talked about in such a manner like this, with both of them being pretty open about wanting Davante to join the team. But there are some hurdles, obviously, with this, if this were to be a reality. Davante Adams still has about 3 years left on his current contract, so any sort of trade or any sort of transaction to get Davante over to New York is going to cost the Jets a lot. And the main idea with this Jets team, on how they've built it, on how they've structured everything, their acquisitions, Aaron Rodgers coming over, especially with Robert Saleh too and his timeline through all of this, they've really set it so the main portion of this winning, hopefully, that is going to happen in 2024 or in 2025, it's all going to happen really in this 2 to 3 year window. They've set everything up to make it so that these next 2 to 3 years are the most successful. And I just am not sure if they could get Davante Adams, one, right now in this offseason, because we're already about to start training camp, and you could obviously expect the Raiders to have everything planned around Davante and everything planned around incorporating him, getting the best out of him. He is their best player at the end of the day. So to now trade him when they don't have to, one, seems unlikely, and one, you would have to trade an ungodly amount of things to get Davante over to your team, especially trading within the conference in the AFC with how tight everything is, how talented every team is, especially with the quarterbacks and just how stacked some of these offenses are getting. It doesn't seem likely that the Raiders will just give Davante Adams up for basically nothing, even though Aaron Rodgers, Garrett, Breece might all want to play with him. It's going to cost the Jets a lot, and I'm not sure if it is really worth it right now, and if it really makes sense for the Jets to do it at the end of the day. Of course, Rodgers has his influence, and I'm not saying he pulls the strings on everything, he makes the decisions on everything, but still, if Aaron Rodgers wants Davante to come over, if he's really adamant about it, and you can see it really without really him having to say it. He already had Nathaniel Hackett come over, and after getting fired with how well, or how bad I should say, he performed with the Denver Broncos, a very good argument can be made that he should not have gotten that job right after the fact that he got fired. But you can point right at the fact that Aaron Rodgers is there. He believed in him, and he wanted him to be hired, so the Jets hired him. And now you saw some of those problems pop up last year, and you hope that it could get better. But that's one example of Aaron pulling some strings there without obviously him saying he is. Alan Lazard's on the team. Randall Cobb was on the team last year, I want to say, as well. So the influence from Rodgers is there. If he goes to Joe Douglas, Robert Saleh, or any of these guys and says that it would be a great for him and this team to get Davante Adams, they might be open to it. But again, I feel more of a worry in other areas of this team rather than offense, because I think they're perfectly fine with Garrett, with Lazard, with Mike Williams, with Breece Hall and these guys. Malachi Corley, he's a good receiver. Xavier Gipson has been getting a lot of praises in OTAs and in mandatory minicamp. I don't really see the need of going for Davante Adams. Not that Davante's not a good player, that nobody in the NFL wouldn't want him. Obviously, everybody would want him, but for the steep price for a 31, 32-year-old wide receiver that's getting paid a lot of money also, I don't see it making too much sense for the Jets, especially because you don't know how good this team could really be yet. I know it looked awful last year, but can we at least see how they look with Aaron Rodgers playing? You know, last year he got hurt 5 plays into the season, and you didn't really get to see what you have in combination with Aaron throwing to Garrett, throwing to Alan Lazard, or handing it off to Breece Hall. Can we see what it looks like before we throw some more future draft picks, some more capital to get Davante Adams when it might not be as necessary if you're not going to make that big of a difference to eventually win the Super Bowl or anything like that? Because if Davante Adams comes over, are they a lock to win the Super Bowl? Probably not. They're probably still behind the Ravens, behind the Chiefs, and I would probably put them, but if we're talking whole NFL, I'd probably put them behind the 49ers, behind the Lions as well. So it really just doesn't make too much sense for me at this point for them to make that sort of decision right now to get Davante Adams over on this team. And also, if I were the Jets, I'd really just look overall to improve the offensive line. I keep harping on it, but that is one that worries me just from the fact that I know they got better, but at the same time, according to reports, according to sources close to the Jets, they all haven't really been practicing together. That chemistry hasn't really been built up yet. And I know they're all veteran players. Maybe they don't need to as much. They're probably going to get a lot of rest days in training camp, but you need something there to have some chemistry there, especially if you're going to be protecting the key to everything. You don't want one of them going down. Then the depth at that area might not be as strong. So that's really the worst case scenario. I want them to improve some of that depth, maybe elsewhere look to reinforce the tight end position, because I don't think that's really a strong suit for them. You can try to do that, and maybe elsewhere on the defensive side of the ball, make it a little bit more sturdy. I don't think you need an elite wide receiver where if you do bring him in, it might not even move the needle that much to make you Super Bowl contenders, but that's how I feel about it. The Jets clearly want him. Obviously, Rodgers wants him. They had a great connection, and it's going to bring some positives. It's going to look exciting. I'm not saying they're not going to create moments again, but we're talking long-term with this team. The Jets want to make the playoffs again, want to make a name for themselves again, because the last time they did that, I want to say, I had it written down. I can't find it now, but it's been a long time, obviously. It's been a long time since the Jets have been in a Super Bowl or anything like that. So that's really the standard right now. That's the needle. That's the ceiling, the standard that the Jets have want to set. At least making the playoffs and making a good showing this year. I don't really see Davante being the missing piece that you absolutely need to bring him in. But that's just my point of view. The Jets could end up doing it, and we'll just see how it goes from there. But let me know what you guys think about it. Do the Jets need Davante Adams? And 2, do you think they'll end up getting him this offseason or the next? Leave your thoughts in the chat box or in the comments section afterwards. But we have 2 more topics to talk about on today's show. A brewing rivalry in the AFC South between the Colts and the Texans. Stay tuned to find out what Colts linebacker E.J. Speed said about their matchup with the Houston Texans in 2024. And also, we're going to talk about the 49ers fullback, Kyle Juszczyk, talking about the painful, hurtful pay cut that he had to take this year. It hurt his ego a little bit, but it was required for him to stay on the 49ers and really to benefit him long-term in football. Find out more on those topics after the break. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. We are now on the topic of the Houston Texans and the Indianapolis Colts. A brewing rivalry, one that I wasn't really expecting to ever really take into consideration, if I'm being honest, because with how much better, not only that the Houston Texans got this year, but also the Tennessee Titans, I was a big fan of what they did. Also the Jacksonville Jaguars, while they didn't end the season well last year, to start off the year, they spent a good amount of it as the number one seed in the AFC. So all three of them wrapped into this division. A lot of people, including myself, have really written off the Colts already, just in comparison. They have good players, but in comparison to the other teams, initially it looks like they could finish last just from looking at it right now, but it could be far from the case, obviously. Are people counting out the Colts too quickly already? And it stems from the fact that this rivalry that is sort of starting to come up here between the Colts and the Houston Texans started last year. Started off in their matchups in Week 2 last year and also in Week 18. More so that Week 18 game because the Colts were hosting the Houston Texans in that game, and the Texans ended up winning that game by a score of 23-19, and with that victory and also the Jaguars losing to the Titans the next day, it helped wrap up the AFC South Division title, and the Colts go on to make the playoffs. They win the division after that victory against the Colts, and that left a bad taste in the Colts' mouth, obviously not doing enough to prevent that from happening. But earlier that year, in Week 2, when everything was still fresh, obviously CJ wasn't CJ Stroud, the Colts actually won that game. The Colts won that game with Anthony Richardson in their lineup earlier on in the year. Obviously, they won that game, and it was one of the games where Anthony Richardson really showed out and really made a name for himself on the kind of quarterback and the kind of excitement that he could bring to the Colts. So last year's series finished 1-1, and on that topic of Anthony Richardson, one could point to the fact, E.J. Speed certainly did, the linebacker from the Indianapolis Colts, that I will get to his comments in just a second here. But if you look at some of the stats that Anthony Richardson put up in his first 4 games, and just the fact that they beat the Texans in Week 2 last year, you could argue, just looking at those numbers, 577 passing yards, 136 rushing yards, 3 passing touchdowns to 4 rushing touchdowns, and a 2-2 record. On track, really, just only through the first 4 games, to have crazy numbers for a rookie. And we'll never know the answer, but could Anthony Richardson would have had a similar season to CJ Stroud if he stayed healthy like CJ did the entire year? I don't know, but just based on the pace that he was going at in his first 4 games, I don't think it's too far off. I don't think it's too far off because of that dynamic aspect that he brings with his legs. You already see the 7 total touchdowns in just the rushing game. With an offensive mind like Shane Steichen, and you saw how dominant his offense was with the Philadelphia Eagles during his time there when they went to the Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts, a similar build to Anthony Richardson. You could see where the similarities lie, obviously, and where the excitement could come from that because Shane Steichen already had success with Jalen and the pace that Anthony Richardson was on. Maybe if Anthony Richardson played in that Week 18 game, the story could have been different. It was only a 4-point game at the end of the day in Indianapolis. So if Anthony Richardson was there, who's to say that the Colts wouldn't have swept the series last year? And clearly, there's a lot of optimism coming from me based on that fact. But there's also that same optimism from the Colts linebacker, E.J. Speed, and he shared his thoughts this year on liking their chances really a lot this year going into 2024 against the Houston Texans and against this mini rivalry that's starting to build up between both of them. He said, it was everything. It was everything, man. They made some moves in the offseason that I respect, but I mean, coming back last year, we had AR. First game came out and played well and won the game. They won the game when it matters. Week 1 should be good. It's 1-1 with our quarterbacks. We both got quarterbacks in the same year, and it will be a good tiebreaker. And everything that he said makes sense and is a fact. You know, the Colts won the initial matchup with Anthony Richardson. Then he wasn't there in the second game. The Texans took that one. So it is 1-1 right now, but the Colts almost have a better argument, or EJ Speed has a better argument just because Anthony Richardson wasn't there. But you could also say on the flip side now that the Texans might be just too good right now. They might be way too good to just compare to the Colts roster, because in free agency, totally different approaches to what was going on. The Colts really focused in on bringing back their main guys, the guys that they were most comfortable with, that they trusted the most. And the Texans, while they did that with some players, they went out and got Danielle Hunter, went out and got Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs, guys like this that make huge impacts now, a year removed from obviously last year, heading into 2024. It makes a huge difference now. They're more ready to win now than the Indianapolis Colts are at this point. Regardless of the fact that they played them well last year, it is hard to believe now that it could be that close again. But who am I to say? But going back to the question, are people counting out the Colts too quickly now? Actually, before I mention that, EJ Speed also said that this is going to be a heavy rivalry game. And I mentioned that because a lot of times when it is sort of these rivalry games, when you have more to play for outside of just football, you can see the games become a little bit closer you always see it with some underdog team that really has no business playing on paper, matching up with another team. But because you have those extracurriculars, because you have that added motivation, it becomes a lot closer than you really expected to. And you have the fact that EJ Speed said that. And also, I don't know if you guys were aware, the other comments that Zaire Franklin, another linebacker for the Colts, said this offseason. He said that basically that C.J. Stroud last year was talking crazy to him during the game. And in his words, he said, I need to see that boy again, referencing their matchups, obviously, in 2024. C.J. Stroud responded with, calling him out, saying that he didn't do anything when he was feeling like that last year. So we already have the bickering, the trash talk back and forth already. So that could give the Colts a bit more of an edge to want to go out there and punch the Texans in the mouth and surprise them. But I just find it hard to believe that they could really just flat out beat them at the end of the day. The Texans have done a great job this offseason of getting better, and it doesn't really count out the Colts too quickly. If it's just comparing them to the Texans, I think the Texans would probably take it. But in regards to this entire division, which we started off by talking about, I could really see the Colts realistically splitting with all the other teams. I can see all three of the other teams, apart from the Texans, splitting the season series with each of their division rivals. I think it's that close in that division. I think that division is going to be super entertaining to watch. It's really a coin toss because, like I mentioned, all these teams got better or had something about them this year that, one, made them a little bit worse to where the competition's closer, or they closed the gap a little bit, again, to make that competition a little bit closer, if that makes sense. You see the Colts, obviously, with Anthony Richardson come back, they've closed the gap on a lot of those teams, just having their starting quarterback play. Will Levis, how does he move the needle for the Tennessee Titans? Because they got better, certainly, but could his play sort of bring them down a level if he plays pretty badly, or it could elevate them to that next level, and maybe they're pushing the Texans in that division? And then you look at Jacksonville, they brought back some players. They signed Eric Armstead, which was huge. They brought in Darnell Savage. Good moves, but they lost Calvin Ridley at the end of the day. So how does that balance out, and how well do they look, or does it look like they took a step back this year in 2024 compared to what they did last year? All these teams have an aspect about them that makes me want to believe in them, but also another thing happened that I'm like, oh, wait, maybe not. I think the Colts, it's not a given right now as a final statement to this segment. I don't think it's a given for the Colts to finish last in this division. I really don't think so. I don't think right now you can say 100% that this team's obviously going to finish last. No discussion about it. A lot of things could happen in an NFL season. Obviously, injuries and things like that. Just the expectations that you have on a team could just not pan out that way. There's a lot of factors that go into it. You know, getting hot at the right time. When your bye week is, that's another big one. And when this stretch of games happens where maybe you're on a losing streak, maybe you're on a winning streak and everything goes wrong, or you find that aha moment, that breakthrough moment at some point in the season that carries you into the playoffs or anything like that, all those things shift the season dramatically, and I'm excited to see it. Apart from the AFC North, like we finished talking about with Cam Heyward, the NFC West, the AFC South is really becoming a exciting, young, fun division just to watch. All those teams are just getting better really fast, and it's definitely going to be one of the divisions, one of the games, a lot of the games that I tune into this year. But I want to get your guys' thoughts. Are you confident in the Colts at all this year? Am I being too confident in them? Leave your guys' thoughts in the chat box or in the comment section after the video. And that'll do it for that segment. That'll wrap up that discussion. But we have one more thing to talk about on today's show. That is Kyle Juszczyk. We're going to give the fullback some love on today's show. We're going to talk about him taking a pay cut this offseason for the benefit of the 49ers, but also a benefit to himself and for his career. I'll elaborate some more on what I mean by that, but we'll be right back after this break to talk some more on Kyle Juszczyk and the San Francisco 49ers. Thank you for joining me back here on the last segment on today's show. And I wanted to bring up this topic around the San Francisco 49ers and their beloved fullback, their Swiss Army knife, Kyle Juszczyk. The 49ers basically overall had to make a lot of tough decisions this year, from re-signing Eric Armstead. They obviously couldn't do that. Trying to re-sign Kyle Juszczyk, they were more successful doing that than Eric Armstead. Brandon Ayuk, obviously, how much money they're going to pay him with the season that he just had. They got already the extension with Christian McCaffrey done, which was great. Juwan Jennings also coming back to the team. But talking about Eric Armstead and Kyle Juszczyk, they were both in a similar situation where they were more veteran players, and the 49ers approached both of them with the potential of taking a pay cut for both of them. Ideally, I would have assumed for the San Francisco 49ers. Eric Armstead, obviously now with the Jaguars, it wasn't a successful attempt to get him to take a pay cut. I think, I could be wrong, but I did see him make a comment about it and how he felt disrespected by it. With just him being the longest tenured 49er from this group of guys, he really didn't want to take a pay cut, but the 49ers obviously needed it to keep all these good players on their roster. They couldn't agree to a pay cut with him, so he moved on. And with Kyle Juszczyk, it was harder to do it. It was obviously a painful situation for him to go through, but they were more successful in doing it, and they got it done with Juszczyk because, one, like I mentioned, he didn't want to take a pay cut, but he did, and it ended up saving the 49ers $4 million in cap space, and it keeps him on the team going forward too, which is a positive thing that I will reference back to further into this segment. But right now, I wanted to bring up what Kyle Juszczyk said, speaking with NBC Sports Bay Area, on just how it all went down, his feelings around it, and just, what made him want to do it. He said, "Honestly, it hurt when John came to me and asked. I wasn't necessarily expecting it, and I think it's natural for anybody that it kind of hurts your ego. It hurts your heart a little bit. I do understand that it's a business, but I do feel like I'm as valuable as what I expected to get paid." And at the end of the day, he basically said his desire to stay as a San Francisco 49er was what got him to stay on the team and take that pay cut. Also, it was important for him to remain as the highest paid fullback, and he did. He didn't take that big of a pay cut for him not to be the highest paid fullback, so that's still a positive for him. He still holds on to that title. And he said that was important to him as well, because I don't think I can name another fullback other than Patrick Ricard right now in the NFL, or at least one that does as much to this team as Kyle Juszczyk does, because he isn't just your typical fullback. He just doesn't block for the running back. He lines up everywhere. He's almost like a mini tight end. He could be a slot receiver. He could be a blocker on the end of the line. He could be a typical fullback. He does a lot for this team, and even right now at 33 years old, I think he still brings a lot to this team, even from what I mentioned on the field, but also off the field, that I'm sure it would have been a painful divorce for both sides if they couldn't get something done. I'm sure the 49ers felt bad about it, trying to get Juszczyk to do it, but going back to his age, going back to the position he plays as well, he's 33 years old as a fullback. You could imagine in a pecking order of who you approach to take a pay cut, you're probably going to go to the fullback first among all the positions that you can do, and the one that's most likely to do it, one that might not affect the team so much. It is a unique situation with Juszczyk just because, like I mentioned, he does so much for them, but they did approach him, and they were successful in doing it. And knowing that you have the extension with Christian McCaffrey, you can't obviously afford to mess that up. They were able to get it done, much in part for Kyle Juszczyk being a good sport about it, and also the potential of extending Brandon Ayuk in the future. You needed that extra cap space. They got it, and now it's up to them to kind of figure it out. But staying on Kyle Juszczyk and what it means for him, not only him, but around this topic surrounding him, because more pay cut talks could be coming with the 49ers later, maybe this year or towards the end of this year, or even in the offseason next year. I don't think this is the last we're going to hear about them trying to get their players to take a pay cut, just because that is the payoff you have when you have so many good players. When you have so many good players on your team, you can't all be the highest paid at your positions. It just doesn't work like that. Anthony Manzano, how's it going? Welcome to the show. But yeah, that's a problem when you have an all-star roster. Obviously, it's great. You have the best tight end, arguably, one of the best quarterbacks, one of the best receivers, another great young receiver, and a great offensive line, the best running back. It all is great on the field. But once you get to these talks financially, they all can't be the highest paid at their position. So something has to happen, and with further extensions coming up later on, with Brock Purdy next offseason, Debo potentially also looking for a new contract next year, I don't think the pay cuts, the pay cut discussions are the last that we're going to hear from the 49ers at all. Juszczyk was just the easiest one to do right now, and he was a good sport about it. He wanted to stay with the 49ers, so that played for their benefit overall. But Anthony says, do you think the one position in the NFL is going to be affected? Do you think the one position in the NFL is going to be affected the most is the fullback position in terms of free agency, because not every team uses a fullback? Yeah, I think so. like I mentioned, it's one of those positions where I can't personally name another great fullback other than Juszczyk or Patrick Ricard. And it is going almost out of style now to have a typical fullback, like you mentioned, just because the league is more going towards a passing style, more points, not so much running the ball, not so much I formation where you need a fullback really. And if you need extra blockers, again, teams don't go to a fullback, they just bring in another offensive lineman. So that's why I think you have really only two that stand out, at least to me, because they're really good at what they do and they fit the styles of their team. Kyle Juszczyk being that Swiss Army knife, Patrick Ricard being more of that run blocking fullback that fits the Ravens style and what they're trying to do. It's definitely one of the positions that is going to be affected with how the NFL is shifting to more of a passing league. But in terms of free agency and things like that, it kind of leads into my next point that you brought it up, Anthony, and that point about free agency and how it's affected. Kyle Juszczyk actually brought it up, interestingly enough, and this really just caught my attention because he mentioned how it was the first time in his career that how long he plays might not, be determined by him. It might not come down to him just deciding to, all right, the 49ers don't want me, I'm just going to go and play somewhere else. It doesn't really work like that for a fullback, like you mentioned, Anthony, back to your point about free agency. For a 33-year-old fullback to hit the market and to anticipate teams coming and calling his phone endlessly, it's not a realistic thing to happen. And he came to that realization and found it most appropriate to take the pay cut with the 49ers. And it all goes hand in hand. I never really thought about it like that. I heard Kyle Juszczyk's thoughts about it, and now that you're also bringing it up, it really is an intriguing point because it could just, the fullback position could just, die off right there. If Kyle Juszczyk doesn't decide to re-sign, maybe another team doesn't sign him and he decides to ultimately retire, and then you really only have Patrick Ricard, and he's getting up there as well. So not a lot of players, if you talk about the next generation, are thinking about becoming fullbacks. Everything is more spread. Everything is more passing. So, yeah, it is one of the positions that is most affected. And Kyle Juszczyk even said that it was going to be extremely hard to play elsewhere for anybody else to sign him if he didn't take that pay cut and just stay with the 49ers and how highly they value him on that team. Regardless of how much he's getting paid, he is still the highest paid fullback. So, ultimately, he just came down to the decision that this was probably the best chance right now at this point in his career to win a Super Bowl. And that's where it comes down to some of these talks. It's not all just about extensions and getting more money. Sometimes these conversations that Kyle Juszczyk has get overlooked a lot of the times, and it could be very beneficial. It already was beneficial to keeping Christian McCaffrey and bringing back Juwan Jennings, I'm sure. And also it could play a part in Brandon Ayuk possibly signing back with more cap space. But, I thought it was interesting the points that he brought up. And for a 49ers team that's trying to keep everybody together, this could be a pivotal thing that keeps everybody together and keeps everybody happy. But will Brandon Ayuk, really as the next piece of the puzzle to fall, be able to stay on the team? Will the 49ers be able to keep him? Or will their efforts with Kyle Juszczyk sort of fall short if Brandon Ayuk and the 49ers can't come to an agreement? I'm more of a pessimist about that. I don't think it's going to happen, but he wants to be there, which is good, but we're going to have to see where the financial talks take these conversations as we get closer and closer to training camp. But that'll wrap it up for that segment. That'll wrap it up for the show. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. If you want to see more of this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube for a variety of different forms to watch the show, watch content around the show, around YouTube Shorts, all the live videos, and also individual segment videos are all on both YouTube channels. And as a final reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time to watch some more NFL discussions and listen to some more conversations around the NFL with me, Manny Maradiaga as your host, thanking you for joining me, and I hope to see you guys back here with me again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.